Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Peh Gimel, in which we complete the 8th perek and begin the 9th. The Mishnah taught Nichnas lechaper. If one takes blood of a korban and that's supposed to be sprinkled outside on the outside mizbeach and brings it into the hechal, then the blood becomes pasul. That's what we learned yesterday. And now the question is, what do you mean when you say bring it in? Just to bring it in, or actually sprinkle it inside? The Mishnah mentioned the machloket. Nichnas lechaper, when we say that all the blood will become invalid. Remember, we have 2 cups. One we keep in the courtyard and one is brought in. And if you bring it in, all of the blood, even the one in the courtyard, becomes pasul. When we said that, that meant, according to the Eliezer, even if he did not do anything with the blood, he did not sprinkle it on the mizbeach, just bringing it in makes it pasul. However, Rabbi Shimon says, ad sheyechaper, he actually has to use it for kapara, sprinkle it on the mizbeach, and then all the blood, even the one outside, becomes pasul. But if he doesn't do anything with it, then then the one outside does not become pasul. That's what we're going to analyze now. In a minute, we'll get to the Yehuda, who says, Im nichnis shogeg kasher. If he brought it in by mistake, it's okay. Well, what does that mean? If he did it on purpose and he brought it in, or brought it in and sprinkled, does it be Yehuda agree with Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Shimon? So that we'll get to in a minute. But first, let's see the sources for the first 2 opinions. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ne'emar kan lechaper bakodesh, v'ne'emar lehalan, v'chol adam lo yeh be'ol moed be'ol lechaper bakodesh. Ma lehalan b'shelo kiper, afkan b'shelo kiper. Rabbi Eliezer brings a gezer hashava from these 2 pesukim. The first one is in Vayikra chapter 6, the main pasuk that we quoted multiple times yesterday, from which we learned the basic law. V'chol chatat asher yubah midama el ohel moed lechaper bakodesh lo te'achel ba'esh tisaref. Any blood, that's a blood of an outside hatat, that you bring the blood inside to Ohel Moed, then all of the blood will become no good. And it says here the phrase lechaper bakodesh. It says the same phrase in Vayikra chapter 16 in the context of Yom Kippur. It says v'chol adam lo yeh b'ol moed v'b'ol lechaper bakodesh. When the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh Kodashim, no one is allowed to be with him. Ad seto v'cheper ba'ado ba'ad beto ba'ad kol kehal Yisrael. He has to be alone. And it says the phrase lechaper bakodesh. So here is a prohibition for anyone to go into Ohel Moed when the Kohen brings in the blood of the pad and sa'ir. So we make a gezer hashava. Just like a person is not allowed to go into the Kodesh on Yom Kippur, and it says the phrase lechaper bakodesh, so too one is not allowed to bring blood in. Now, a person that goes in, that he goes in even before, he's not allowed to go in even before the Kohen Gadol sprinkles the blood in the Kodesh. He's just not allowed to be there at all, even before the sprinkling. So just like over there, regarding the prohibition of a person of another Kohen or anyone to go in, it's even when he did not yet atone and sprinkle the blood. So too, the prohibition of bringing blood in applies even if the Kohen did not yet sprinkle, just bringing the blood in. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Ne'eman kan lechaper, Ne'eman lehalan, ve'et par hachatat, ve'et serir hachatat, asher hubah et damam lechaper, ma lehalan b'shekiper, afkan b'shekiper. Rabbi Shimon also is going to make a gezer hashava, and that is from, first, the same pasuk that we had before, lechaper bakodesh, but the other pasuk is going to look at one that comes a few pasukim later. The pasuk says, "Ve'et par hachatat ve'et sa'ir hachatat asher hubah et damam lechaper bakodesh yosi el mechus hamachaneh ve'sarefu ba'esh et orotav ve'et besaram ve'et pirsham." The par hatat and the sa'ir hatat, that the Kohen brought the blood of these 2 korbanot into the Kodesh to make kapara, and it says the same phrase lechaper bakodesh. Then you have to take those animals and take them outside of the encampment and burn them in fire, the entire thing. And the next pasuk is going to be relevant in a second. Vasoref otam, the kohen, whose job it is to burn the bodies of the animals. He actually becomes tahor, and he has to wash in water. And so we see, so that's the gezer hashava. And so just like malalan b'sheki per, when do you burn the carcass of the animal? Only after you sprinkle the blood. So too, the prohibition of bringing the blood into the Kodesh is only going to kick in if you sprinkle that blood in the Kodesh. Then it becomes invalid and all the blood becomes invalid, even the one outside. But if you just bring it in and didn't do anything with it, then the blood outside remains valid. That's Rabbi Shimon's opinion. We ask, what's at the essence of their machloket? You can make a gezer hashava. They're both making it with the same phrase, lechaper b'kodesh. So why choose one pasuk over the other? Mor sabar danin chutz mechutz ven danin chutz mebifnim. Rabbi Eliezer says we should compare like with like. And we should compare chutz, a regular korban hatat, a regular korban that is an outside korban. That's the thing that you're not allowed to take that blood inside. So that's what we're trying to learn to. That's the pasuk in the first pasuk in Vayikra chapter 6. We should learn from another law of staying outside, and that's regarding Yom Kippur, that all other people have to stay outside of the Kodesh and cannot come in. So that makes sense to compare those two laws and not compare chutz, a korban hatat that's supposed to be outside, from the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur that are brought inside. Those you have to bring the blood inside. So that's not as good a comparison. That's different. And therefore, the Rabbi Eliezer learns it from the earlier pasuk. However, the Rabbi Shimon says, he says, I also agree we should compare like with like, and the ones that are more alike are the two animal laws. You have the pad chatat that's supposed to be outside. That's chatat, any chatat that's supposed to be outside. That's the law that we're trying to learn, that you can't bring that blood inside. And the other law is also regarding an animal, a pad and a sa'ir of Yom Kippur, where the blood is brought inside, and then it says the animal you take outside. And so from there we learn, and that when do you do that? That's at a point when you already sprinkled the blood. So that makes sense to learn a law from one animal to a law from another animal, and not learning a law of an animal, that korban hatat, you can't bring the blood inside, from a person, that people can't go into the Kodesh when the Kohen Gadol is in there on Yom Kippur. You can't. That's comparing people, humans, to animals, which is not quite the same. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Now Rabbi Yehuda says if he brought it in b'shogeg, then it's still valid. Hamezid pasul b'shekiper or b'shelo kiper. So that means, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you brought it in on purpose, then it's going to be pasul. Well, in which case is it when he atoned and put the blood, like Rabbi Shimon says, or even if he didn't atone, just coming in, like Rabbi Eliezer says. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, mi mashma shene'emar, ve'et para chatat ve'et sira chatat asher hu ba'et tamam, elu mo'ed lechaper ba'kodesh, ma tamod omar ve'hasoref. So we're going to prove that Rabbi Yehuda actually agrees with Rabbi Shimon. Let's see how we're going to prove that, because the pasuk says back in Shemot, back in Vayikra, pasuk 27 and 28 that we read already, and so that's this pasuk that says you have to take, after you sprinkle the blood, you take the carcass outside, the sarifu ba'esh, and the one who burns it is going to become tameh. Now, why do we need the pasuk that says that the one who burns it is going to become tameh? We're quoting a midrash here, a midrash halacha. The Gemara interrupts and says, "What do you mean matamod omar hasofef? The gufei is terich. Why are you asking why I need the pasuk? Of course, I need the pasuk to teach me that very law, that the kohen who burns the carcass is going to become tameh. Ela matamod omar hatat hatat. No, what we meant to ask actually is, why do you have to repeat the word hatat here? Ve'et par hachatat ve'seir hachatat. Just say ואת פר והשעיר, ואת הפר והשעיר החטאת. Just say chatat once. And why do you repeating chatat? And the answer of the Braita is going to be Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. לפי שלא למדנו אלא לפר ושעיר של יום הכיפורים, שנשרפין הבית הדשן מטמאין בגדים, שאר שרפין נשרפין מנין, תלמוד לומר חטאת חטאת דברי רבי יהודה. Because from this pasuk I only know that the pod and the goat of Yom Kippur, that after you sprinkle the blood, then you take the rest of the body of the animal and you burn it in the Bet HaDeshen, the place of the ashes, and that person that does that burning, well, his clothing will become tameh. But how do we know about other animals that are burnt? Meaning other inside korbanot, like the pod of Kohen Mashiach. That's also brought inside, and nobody eats it. The rest of it is burnt. How do you know that also the one who burns it, his clothes become tameh? Because it says chatat chatat. The extra word chatat tells me other chatat offerings that are inside offerings also, the person will become tameh. Okay, that's not yet the proof, but we're going to use this in a second from the fact that Rabbi Yehuda has the way he deals with the Pesukim, as we're going to see in a minute. Rabbi Meir Omer, Eno sarich, harehu Omer ve'et par hachatat ve'et sir hachatat, she'en tamud omar lechaper. Ma tamud omar lechaper? Limed al kol hamit kaperim, shehasorfan metameh begadim. Rabbi Meir says, I agree with your law, but I don't need your derivation of a double chatat. I can learn it in a simpler way. From the fact that it says vet par hachatat evet seir hachatat, and then it says lechaper. In the continuation, asher v'tamam lechaper bakodesh. I know that these are lechaper bakodesh because we've been talking about this the whole chapter beforehand, that these are there for kapara. So why do I need that phrase? Oh, this is what teaches that that all other sacrifices that bring atonement, that if you have to burn it outside, the one who burns it also, his clothing becomes tameh. So the Bimei learns it from the extra phrase, lechaper al hakodesh. Lechaper, right, bakodesh. Okay, now that's the end of the Baraita. Rabbi Yehuda lechaper lo mashma leh. How come Rabbi Yehuda does not agree with Rabbi Meir and learn it in a simpler way from the words lechaper? My ta'ama la mishum nimiba'yale legizra shava. Is it not because he already uses this phrase lechaper bakodesh for a gezerah shava? Which gezerah shava? That's the gezerah shava of Rabbi Shimon. Remember, Rabbi Shimon quoted this pasuk with the pasuk in Vayikra 6 to say that just like this law over here is only after you sprinkle the blood, so too the law in chapter 6 that you cannot bring blood in, and then it makes otherwise it makes all the blood invalid, is only if you bring the blood inside and sprinkle the blood, lechaper, bakodesh, as it says here. And so that was Rabbi Shimon. So that must be the reason why Rabbi Yehuda does not agree with Rabbi Meir, because he already uses lechaper for the gezerah shava of Rabbi Shimon. That means that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Shimon that if on purpose you bring the blood in and you sprinkle the blood on the inner mizbeach, then and only then does all the blood, the one that's outside in the courtyard, also become invalid. Hadran alach kol hazevaḥim shenit arebu. We now begin the 9th perek. Hamizbeach mekadesh et hara'ui lo. The altar makes sanctified that which is fitting for it. What that means is that there are certain items that you should not put on the mizbeach lechetechila, but if you put it on, then the holiness of the altar makes that thing holy, such that now that it's on there, you should not take it off. This does not apply to everything. It has to be something that is ra'ui lo, fitting for it. We'll see what the it is here in this phrase. There's like a heading. There's going to be two interpretations. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, kol hara'ui la'ishim im ala lo yered. Rabbi Yoshua says the it here is the fire. That anything that is fitting for the fire on the altar, even if there's something wrong with it and therefore should not be placed upon it, lechatechila, some item that's disqualified, but b'di'avad, you already put it on, okay, it becomes sanctified and don't take it down. Shene'emar, hi ha'ola al mokedah, ma'ola shehi re'uya la'ishim, im alta lo tered, af kol shehu ra'uy la'ishim, im ala lo yered. And we learn it from the pasuk that says, it is the burnt offering on the fire on the altar. So it's saying that there's something about an olah sacrifice that goes on the altar, just like a korban olah, that's well suited to be put on the altar. You're supposed to put the entire korban olah. And when you put it on, you're not allowed to take it down. So too, other items also that are fit to be on the Mizbeach, even though they became invalid and you can't put it lechatechila, but if you put it on, then that invalid status goes away because the altar makes it holy. Rabban Gamliel Omer, Kol hara'oi lamizbeach im ala lo yered, shenemar hi ha'olah al mokedah al hamizbeach. Rabban Gamliel says the it of law is not the fire, but rather the mizbeach, and teaches anything that is fit to put on the mizbeach. We'll see what the difference is between them. You do not take down. As the pasuk, he quotes the same pasuk, but quotes two more words. Hi ha'olah, a burnt offering on the fire, which is upon the altar. Emphasis on the altar. Ma'olah shiru'uyah lamizbeach im alta lo tered, af kol davar shura'uy lamizbeach im alta lo tered. Just like a korban olah is fit for the mizbeach, it happens to be fit for the fire also, but the mizbeach is a more inclusive term. So and when you put it on, you can't take it off. So to anything that is fit in some sense for the mizbeach, if you put it on, then you do not take it off. This is not going to include everything. If you have a chair, and the chair, you put the chair on the mizbeach. Oh, well, now it's on. Do I leave it on? No, it's not fit. There's no possibility that a chair is ever going to be fit. Maybe for the wood. Okay, you can put it on for the wood. But something else, some fruit that you're going to put on there, right? Something that you're going to put on as a korban, that you never put that on as a korban. So therefore that comes down. But we're talking about some items that are sacrificial items generally, but it became invalid in some way. Then if you put it on, you don't take it down. Now what's the difference between them? En ben dibre Rabban Gamliel dibre Rabbi Yehoshua ela hadam vehanesachim. Rabban Gamliel omer lo yerdu, Rabbi Yehoshua omer yerdu. There is no difference between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua except for blood and libations, where Rabban Gamliel is going to say, if you put them up, they don't come down. Why? Because blood is placed on the mizbeach, on the wall, on the side of the mizbeach, but not on the fire. And similarly, libations, like wine libations, they're not put on the fire. You don't burn them, but rather you pour them down a hole in the corner of the mizbeach. So these items are fit for the mizbeach. Therefore, the Rabban Gamliel says, if you put them on, you don't bring them down. Even if they're pasul and you wouldn't have put them on the chatechila. Rabbi Yehoshua says, bring them down. Why? Because Rabbi Yehoshua says, only something that's fit for the fire, something that's burnt on the altar, and it's some like meat of a korban, and it's invalid, then you should not put it on. If you put it on, leave it there. But when it comes to blood or libations, those are not supposed to be put on the fire. So if you put them on the mizbeach, take it off. It shouldn't be there in the first place in any case on the fire. Rabbi Shimon Omer, hazebach kasher unsachim pesulim. Hanesachim kesherim v'hazebach pasul, afilu ze v'ze pesulin, hazebach lo yered, v'hanesachim yeredu. Rabbi Shimon adds a third opinion. It seems to be a variation of Rabbi Yehoshua's opinion. He says as follows: if the korban, the animal, is kosher, is valid, but the nesachim are invalid. Or second case, other way around. The nesachim are valid, but the animal becomes invalid. Or even if both of them are invalid. In all these cases, either one can become invalid, for example, by becoming tameh, or by being taken outside of the designated area. In all these cases, the korban itself, the animal itself, if you put it on the mizbeach, on the fire, do not bring it down. But if you put the libations on it, then they do come down. So why would that be? It seems that Rabbi Shimon agrees with Rabbi Yehoshua that an invalid korban, if you put it up, don't take it down. Everybody says that, because an invalid korban, the meat of the animal, is fit for the fire. It's also fit for the mizbeach, so that you don't bring down. But the nesachim, okay, this is something that is not fit for the fire. Now, Rabban Gamliel said, if it's fit for the mizbeach, you leave it up. But here it says you bring it down. So this makes sense according to Rabbi Yehoshua that if it goes up, you have to bring it down because nesachim are not fit. The added chidush that Rabbi Shimon seems to be making is that even if the nesachim themselves, in and of themselves, are kosher, so you might think that you could leave it up. But the zevach is pasul. Even so, because the zevach and nesachim are attached, we're talking about a case like a korban shelamim, where the korban necessitates bringing wine libation together with it. So nothing happened to the wine libations, perfectly good, but the korban became tameh. Well, because they're attached to each other, and you're not supposed to bring the animal becomes invalid. Therefore, the libations also become invalid, and once they're invalid, then you cannot put them on because we agree with Rabbi Yoshua. But you might think, you could argue that and say, well, maybe the libations can stand on their own because they are, in fact, valid. So maybe they could stay up. According to Rabbi Shimon, at least, they have to go down because the associated korban also became invalid. Gemara, Ra'ui lo in she'en ra'ui lo la, leme'ute mai. The Mishnah taught that something that is fit for the Mizbeach, if it goes up, you leave it on there, but if it's not fit, then you take it down. For not fit for either the Mizbeach or the fire. What is that coming to exclude? What would be not fitting that even if you put it up, you take it down? Amar Papa leme'ute kemasin shelo kiddeshu bichli. Papa says this comes to exclude a handful of flour from a mincha offering that was not made holy by placing it into a vessel. When you bring a mincha offering, you bring a lot of flour and one vessel, and then the kohen takes a handful in his hand and he puts it in a second vessel. Whatever he puts in that second vessel then will be placed on the mizbeach. But he put it in his hand, he did not yet put it in the second vessel. And now if he takes that and directly puts it on the mizbeach, it's no good. Not only is he not supposed to do it, even if he puts it on, he has to take it down because it's not fit for the mizbeach. It's not fit for the mizbeach until it goes into the second vessel. Matkif la Ravina, Maishena mid'ula damar ula emure kodashim kalin she'elan lifnei zirikat aman lo yerdu nasu lachmo shel mizbeach. Ravina challenges this the statement of Rav Papa because he asks, how is it different from what Ula taught? Ula taught a case of the insides, the sacrificial parts of Kodashim Kalim like Shelamim, even though the people eat most of it, some of it goes on the Mizbeach. If someone put those Emurim on the Mizbeach before the blood was sprinkled on the Mizbeach, what you're supposed to do is do Shechita, collect the blood, put the blood on the Mizbeach, and only then put the sacrificial parts. So that's the proper order. If you did it in the wrong order, and you put the sacrificial parts of the meat on the Mizbeach before the blood was sprinkled, even though you shouldn't do that, if you did, it stays there, and it becomes bread of the altar. So what's the difference between these two cases? In both of them, we're missing a step. Yet, in the case of the Kadashim Kalim, even though you skipped a step, you're missing a step of putting the blood. Nevertheless, even though you didn't do that step, if you put the emurin on the mizbech, you leave it there. Why not say the same thing here? That you have the kimitza, you didn't put it in the second vessel, and you put it directly on the mizbech. You missed a step. You skipped a step. Nevertheless, shouldn't it be the same law? And the answer is no, it's different. Hanach la michaseru maaseh begufayhu. Haneh michaseru maaseh begufayhu. In those cases, meaning in the kodashim kalim and those animals, there's no act that's missing regarding the body itself. That meat, nothing else was going to happen with that meat. You took the meat, you did shechita, you cut it up, and that meat, you're supposed to wait till after the blood is sprinkled, but that meat does not need to be placed in another vessel. Nothing needs to happen to the meat itself. And therefore, even though you missed the step of the dam, that will not affect the fitness of the meat. the meat, if you shouldn't put it on, but if you did, it's okay, because nothing else was going to happen to it. That's different from the kemitzah, where it was missing a step of that very flour that you put on the mizbeach, required another step to be placed in the vessel, and you didn't do that. So that is worse. That's why that's a case of en ra'ui lo, and even if you put it on, you have to take it back down. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer Kol Hara'ui La'ishim Vechule. The Mishnah taught that according to Rabbi Yehoshua, anything that is fit for the fire, if it goes up, it does not come down. And that's because he relies on this phrase, Al Mokedah. The pasuk in its entirety teaches, Tell the Kohanim, this is the law regarding the Korban Olah. Hi ha'olah al mokedah. So this is the Olah that is on the fire. And so Rabbi Yehoshua learns from this phrase that if it goes on the fire, then it stays on the fire, even if it was invalid and you wouldn't have put it to begin with. And then Rabban Gamliel comes and says, no, I learned from this phrase, al ha-mizbeach, that if it's fit for the mizbeach, so that includes even blood and libations, that also stays on it. Now we're going to ask, Rabban Gamliel nameh haketib olah al mokedah. Rabban Gamliel, what are you going to do with the phrase that it goes up on the fire? So it says there fire. So how are you going to interpret those words? Hahu lahadure pok'in hu da'ata. Rabban Gamliel says that means that you should replace anything that gets dislodged. Let's say something that was fit for the fire and you put it on the fire, and after it burned for a while, it fell off, it popped off. Should you put it back on? The answer is yes, because Olah al mokedah, put it back on. So that he uses that for that law, and then he uses Mizbeach for the law that he taught in the Mishnah, that if it's something that is invalid but belongs on the Mizbeach, you put and it was put on, then you leave it on. But this law is that if it belonged on there and then it fell off, you must put it back on. V'idach. Now, where is Rabbi Yehoshua going to learn that law from? Doesn't he agree that you put things back on? How does he know that you put things back on that fell off? He learns it from the next pasuk right after this, that says the Kohen shall put on his linen garment, veherim et hadeshen, and he's going to clean off the ashes. Asher tochal ha'esh et ha'olah al mizbeach v'samos al mizbeach. So since it says the ashes from what the fire ate of the olah, so that means asher tochal ha'esh, that the fire has to consume it, and that means if it fell off, you have to put it back on. Ve'idach, Rabban Gamliel, what is he going to do with that next pasuk? That, the next pasuk, 6:3, is coming to teach me that you have to put on something that was partially consumed from a Korban Olah. The meat of the Korban Olah, partially consumed and it fell off, you put it back on. But if it's Ketoret that was put on the Mizbach HaKetoret, the inside Mizbeach, or the golden altar, and it fell off, even if it's just partially consumed, that you do not put on, because it says here, Asher tochal ha'esh et ha'olah. That olah, we have to make sure it's entirely consumed and put it back on. But the ketoret, that we don't have a law like that. That's what this comes to teach us. Tetan Rabbi Chanina bar Minyomi, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Asher tochal ha'esh et ha'olah al ha'mizbeach, ikole olah tamachzir v'yata machzir ikole ketoret. And in fact, we have a braita from Rabbi Chanina bar Minyomi in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that this pasuk that says that which the fire will eat of the olah on the mizbeach teaches me that if something was partially consumed in a korban olah and it fell off, you put it back on. But a partially consumed ketoret, you do not put back on. So that's what Rabban Gamliel learns from that law. It learns from that pasuk. V'idach. Now Rabbi Yehoshua, where is he going to learn this law from? Lab mimela shamat mina dikole olah mehaderin. Rabbi Yehoshua says, isn't it? Can't you learn it by the way from this pasuk? You already quoted this pasuk to teach me that things that you learn, things that fell off, you have to put back on. So we know that. You can learn both of these details from the same pasuk. It already said, while you're learning the basic law, that something that fell off, you put back on, you read the pasuk and it says, that which the fire ate of the olah, that it applies to olah and does not apply to ketoret. So I learned that intrinsically, I can learn both from this one pasuk. I don't need a separate pasuk to teach me that. Rabban Gamliel Omer, Kol Hara'oi Vechule. Now we're going to ask the question the other way around. Rabban Gamliel learned from the pasuk that says Al HaMizbeach that anything that is fit for the Mizbeach, even if it's pasul, if you put it on, it doesn't come down. That includes the blood and also the Nesachim. And so that's why Rabban Gamliel says the Mizbeach. So we ask, Rabbi Yoshua Nameh HaKitiv Mizbeach, Rabbi Yoshua, he was focusing on Hi'ola Al Mokedah. Anything that's fitting for the fire, we leave on the fire. But it also says the words Al Mizbeach. So what is Rabbi Yoshua going to do with those words? And the answer is, he says that the word Mizbeach is coming to give an explanation for the reason. What is the reason why the merciful one, Hashem, said that anything that's fit for the fire, you leave on the fire if you put it on, even though it's invalid? It's because the Mizbeach makes it holy. So here, Allah al Mokedah. Oh, you put it on the fire, leave it on the fire. Why? Al Mizbeach, it's on the altar. And the altar will sanctify it, and therefore you're allowed to leave it there. Ve'idach Mizbeach acharina ketiv. Rabban Gamliel, where's he going to have the reason for this? That since it's on the Mizbeach, it's fit to stay on it. He used the word Mizbeach to say anything fit for the Mizbeach, you have to leave on it. So where does he have the reason for it? He says, there's another Mizbeach in the rest of the pasuk. Ve'sham Mizbeach. Tu kadbo, you can learn it from there. Ve'idach, and Rabbi Yoshua, what's he going to do with the second Mizbeach? We need to teach me that you have to, something that is unfit, and if it was placed b'diavad on it, you leave it, and that's true whether or not it had a time of fitness. So one of them is when it had a time of fitness. In other words, you have some meat that was perfectly valid. You sprinkled the blood. This meat was perfectly valid, and you could have put it on the mizbeach. But before you did that, it became tameh. So there was a time when it was valid, and then it became invalid after that if you put it on, b'diavad, you don't take it off. And now an extra chidush, even if this meat never had a time when it was valid. For example, at the time of shechita, he had a wrong intention. And that means this meat never had a moment when it was valid. That also, don't put it on, but if you put it on, then you don't bring it down. So that's why we have two words, mizbeach, to teach me both of these. Ve'idach Rabban Gamliel. Where is he going to learn both of these categories from? Kevan de Pesudinin hu v'Rabinu Rachamana lashena hayta lo sha'ata kosher lashena lo hayta lo sha'ata kosher. Rabban Gamliel says, I don't need an extra pasuk. Since either way, it's pasul, and the merciful one said, you know what? If you put it up already, you can leave it there. It makes no difference if it one time was valid or never was valid. It doesn't matter. Either way, right now, it's not valid, and someone put it up there. Okay, either way, it's not valid, but you put it up there, so you leave it there. So he doesn't need two different verses. Rabbi Shimon Omer hazebach kasher. Rabbi Shimon says that if the meat is valid, you could put the meat on and you put it on, you don't take it down. But the nisachim, that even if you put it up, you bring it down. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Ola, ma Ola haba biglal atzma, af kol habain biglal atzman. Yasu nisachim habain biglal zebach. We mentioned that the chidush of Rabbi Shimon is not only saying that it's what's on the fire, like Rabbi Yehoshua. So meat that goes up, you don't bring it down. But nisachim, if nisachim are invalid, those don't belong on the fire. Therefore, you do bring them down. Rabbi Shimon saying an extra chidush that even if the wine is valid in and of itself, but the associated korban became invalid, still, you take it down. And so, how does he know that? Because it says the word olah. Just like olah is something that comes because of itself. You bring the olah and it's supposed to put it on the mizbeach because that's the law of a korban itself. So too, anything that belongs on the mizbeach of its own accord, if you put it up, then you don't take it down. That comes to exclude nesachim that accompany a zevach, where since it doesn't go for its own sake, there are other times when you could just bring a nesachim separately. But here, if you're bringing it as an accompaniment with the korban, then even if nothing happened to the wine remained tahor, but the blood, the blood or the meat became tameh. So since it accompanies, if the meat became tameh, then you cannot, and then the nesachim, if you put it up, you have to bring it down. Next, we learn a baraita that adds two more opinions to the three opinions that we already had in our Mishnah. Remember, in our Mishnah, we had the opinions of Rabbi Yoshua, Rabban Gamliel, and Rabbi Shimon about which items, if that when they are invalid and they go up on the mizbech, that they don't come down. Now we see two more opinions. They're going to learn it from a different pasuk, and therefore have a different and more limited definition of what this law applies to. Rabbi Yosef HaGalili Omer, mitoch shenemar, kol hanogea ba mizbeach yikdash, shomea ani ben ra'ui ben she'eno ra'ui. Talmud lomar kebasim. Ma kebasim re'uyin af kol ra'ui. Rabbi Yosef HaGalili is pointing to this pasuk at near the end of Sefer Shemot that says Shivatim techapel mizbeach v'kedashta oto v'ya mizbeach kodesh kodashim kol hanogea ba mizbeach yikdash. Anything that touches the mizbeach will become holy. So you see, if you had this law of this pasuk alone, it sounds like anything, even something that does not belong on the mizbeach, but once it touches the mizbeach or placed on the mizbeach, then it becomes holy and you leave it there. That's what you might think. But notice the next pasuk is going to talk about kebasim. A couple of pasukim later, it's going to talk about olah. That's going to be relevant for Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Yosef he teaches that since the pasuk says anything that touches the mizbeach becomes holy, I might think whether it's fit or whether it's not fit for the mizbeach. That's why pasuk says kebasim. Just like kebasim animals are fit, so too anything that is similar to kebasim. So, according to Rabbi Yosef, it's going to apply to animals only. Rabbi Akiva omed olah, ma olah re'uya, af kol re'uya. Rabbi Akiva says the word olah, and so anything that it's like an olah is worthy, and even though it's invalid, it stays on, but something that's not like an olah, not so. Now, both of these are animals, so we ask, my benaihu, what's the difference between them? Amarav ada bar ahava, olah ta'of pesulaika benaihu, mor maitela me olah, mor maitela me kebasim. Ravada Barava says a bird olah would be a difference between them. If you have a bird olah that becomes invalid, and therefore you should not put it on the mizbech lechatechila. But what if you did? Rabbi Akiva, who learns from the word olah, so that means an olah, not only an animal olah, but also a bird olah. So therefore applies to birds as well. Whereas Rabbi Yosef Galili that learns it from kevasim clearly is an animal. It's not a type of korban like olah is, but rather an animal, and therefore a bird that is placed on it will not be, cannot stay on it. You have to take it down. Now we ask, according to Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, who learns it from kebasim, what about the word olah? What is he going to do with it? Well, if I only had the word kebasim and not olah, I would think that maybe even if you put a live animal onto the fire on the mizbeach, well, you're not supposed to. A live animal is not valid. I might think that, you put it there, so b'diavad, leave it there. No, just like an olah clearly is an animal that you did shechita, it's dead. So too, and only animals, any animals that are slaughtered, then you can, if they go up, then you leave it there. But if it's a live animal, you take it down. That's what he learns from the word olah. And according to Rabbi Akiva, who learns it from the word olah, what is he going to do with the word kevasim? He says, "I ketib olah v'la ketib kevasim havamina filu mincha katab rachamana kevasim." Because if it said kevasim and did not say, if it said olah and not kevasim, I would think even a mincha offering that is placed on and burnt on the mizbeach, and that's why it says kevasim to exclude a mincha offering. So we see that according to the Rabbi Yosef Galili, only animals that are invalid animals that are placed on, you leave on and don't take off, but birds and meal offerings, and certainly if it was blood or libations, those come down, according to the Bioseg Elidi. So he is the strictest definition. Rabbi Akiva, however, says birds, animals and birds. Those, if they go up, they stay up, but not meal offerings, and then certainly not other libations would come down. Good. Ma'ika ben haneh taneh lehaneh taneh dematnitin. Now, what would be a practical distinction between these two Tanaim over here in this Baraita, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Akiva, and the three opinions that we saw in the Mishnah? Amar Papa kemasim shekachu bekli ika benayu letaneh didan lo yerdu letaneh dematnita yerdu. Papa says it would be kemasim, meal offerings that you made sanctified in a vessel. That would be a difference between them. According to all three opinions in our Mishnah, since it's sanctified, so there has no other step that you need to do with it, but it became, let's say, tameh. And if it goes on, then you leave it on, according to the three opinions in our Mishnah. But according to the two opinions here of the Baraita, it applies either only to animals or only to animals and birds, but the law does not apply to meal offerings, and so the meal offerings, you bring them down. Resh Lakish Amar. Resh Lakish is going to have a long statement that's going to summarize all of the differences between these five Tanaim. He says, Mincha haba'a bifnei atzma ledibrei kulan lo tered. If you have a korban mincha that comes by itself, all of the opinions, he means all of the opinions in the Mishnah, agree that you leave it up. But, except for, Ledibrei Rabbi Yosei Gali v'Rabbi Akiva, tered. But according to these two Tanaim in our Baraita, since it's a meal offering, no, this is not included in the definition. Mincha haba'im hazebach Ledibrei Rabban Gamliel Rabbi Yoshua lo tered, Ledibrei kulan tered. If it's a mincha that accompanies a korban, then, according to Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua, that's the first two opinions in our Mishnah, so it comes along with a korban, but nevertheless, it's an invalid thing, so it doesn't matter if it comes with a korban or not. This, remember, Rabban Gamliel said anything that is valid for the mizbeach. Rabbi Yoshua says anything that is fit for the fire. And a mincha offering is fit both for the mizbeach and for the fire, and therefore it does not come down. However, Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah says, oh, hold on, if it's attached to a korban, and the korban becomes invalid, then the attachment also is no good. And so, therefore, if it's a mincha that comes with a zevach, and either the mincha becomes invalid or the zevach becomes invalid, or both become invalid, then you bring it down, because it's not sustainable in and of itself. That was Rabbi Shimon's chidush. And so, therefore, Rabbi Shimon would say that a korban mincha that accompanies a zebach and one or the other became invalid, you bring it down, and also the two Tanaim in the Baraita also say that it applies to birds or animals, but not mincha offering, and so it comes down. Nesachin haba'im bifnei atzman ledibrei kulan yerdu, ledibrei Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Shimon lo yerdu. If you have a libation offerings that come on their own, so not attached to a korban, according to everybody, they're going to come down. Everybody includes here the two Tanaim in the Baraita, because they say it applies only to animals or maybe birds, but certainly does not apply to nesachim, and so therefore it has to come down. And also Rabbi Yoshua in our Mishnah says only things that are placed on the fire. Nesachim are not placed on the fire, and therefore they come down. But according to the other two opinions in our Mishnah, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Shimon, the nesachim, they're fit for the mizbeach, and they stay there, and they're also independent, so that's fine. Nesachim aba'in im hazebach ledivrei kulan yerdu, ledivrei Rabban Gamliel lechudeh lo yerdu. If it's a libation offering that is an attachment to a korban, then everybody will say they come down. The two Tanim of the our Baraita certainly say they come down, because nesachim, it's not a bird or an animal. And according to the Rabbi Yoshua also, only if it's fit for the fire. This is not fit for the fire. And according to the Rabbi Shimon, since it's attached to a korban, and either that korban becomes invalid or the libation becomes invalid, so it doesn't have a status on its own, and therefore Rabbi Shimon says you bring it down. Rabban Gamliel is the only one that says it doesn't matter if it's dependent or independent, and as long as it's fit for the mizbeach, which nesachim are fit for the mizbeach, they do not come down. That's the end of Resh Lakish's summary. Now, this was a lot of things, and we learned a lot, but the Gemara did not learn a lot. Peshita, you could have figured all that out on your own if you just went back and looked at their words and plugged in the different cases. So we are grateful for Resh Lakish for summarizing everything, but the Gemara wants to know, what did he add? And we have two answers. First one, mincha ba bifnei asma istericha le uchderaba dama rava mitnadeh b'adam minchat nesachim bechol yom. He comes to teach us that you can bring a korban mincha on its own. As Rava teaches, a person can volunteer to bring a minchat nesachim, which is a type of korban mincha that usually you bring with a korban, like with a shelamim or an olah, and it gets entirely burnt up. And so we wouldn't know that you can bring it on its own because the Torah only mentions it in accompaniment with other korban. And so this comes to teach us that, you can bring this type of korban mincha if you want it as a voluntary offering anytime, any day, even every day. Maybe that is what Resh Lakish is teaching us. Well, we ask about that. Why do you have to give us this whole long statement summarizing everything just for that? Why didn't he just say, I agree with Rava? Now, Resh Lakish lived before Rava, so he couldn't have said, I agree with Rava, but he could have said directly these words, So therefore, let's try a different answer. He had to teach us the rule regarding the libations that accompany a korban, because they have a peculiarity, which is that you don't have to offer the libation, the wine, on the same day as the meat. You can bring it the next day or another day. If you have the shelamim, and you have wine that accompanies it, and you do shechita of the shelamim on Sunday. And then you didn't get a chance, the Kohanim didn't get a chance to pour the wine on Sunday. They could do it on Monday, they could do it on Tuesday, and so on. So since it has an independent value, so it's not clear what the law would be. And therefore, I might think, Salkadatech Amina, Hoil v'amarmor minchatam v'niskehem balayla, minchatam v'niskehem lemachar, ken sachim abin b'fnei asman damu, u'modeh Rabbi Shimon de lo yerdu kamashma lan. So I might have thought that since the Master said, the pasuk, quoting the pasuk, minchatam, the korban mincha, and the libations, and you can bring that at night. Minchatam v'niskehem, you can also bring it on the next day. When they accompany a korban, you could bring it even the day after. So since it can be brought on a different day, I might have thought that when I bring it on a different day, the libations will have the same status, the same law as libations that are offered on their own. And maybe Rabbi Shimon would agree that if it goes up, then it doesn't go down. In other words, even if the korban had become invalid on Sunday, but now I didn't bring the wine till Wednesday. And so now if that wine goes up, I might think that it stays up because I brought it on a different day, so maybe it's considered an independent value. Kamash malan, so therefore Resh Lakish brought this the whole thing to teach me this detail, that even though it's brought on a different day, still it's considered an accompaniment of the korban, and if the korban becomes pasul, then the libation also becomes pasul, and if it goes up, you have to bring it down. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen v'amen.